From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! More than 10,000 protesters take to the streets in Syria to demand President Bashar al-Assad step down. We'll go to Damascus for the latest, then to Libya. We get two views on the intervention. We'll speak with Libya's former deputy ambassador to the UN, Ibrahim Dabashi. He represented Gaddafi, now represents the rebels. We'll also speak with Phyllis Venice. She opposes the intervention. Then the nuclear crisis continues to unfold in Japan. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., owners of the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant have filed a federal lawsuit challenging the Vermont legislature's veto power over operation of the reactor when its license expires next month. The plant is just like Japan's Fukushima Daiichi plant. We'll speak with a whistleblower who worked at Vermont Yankee for years. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The European Union's considering sending ground troops into the besieged western Libyan city of Misrata. The city's become a key battleground in the fight between rebel fighters and forces loyal to President Muammar Gaddafi. French officials have called for soldiers to be deployed on the ground to help guide NATO airstrikes and to support the Libyan opposition. European officials said up to 1,000 troops are ready to go in if requested by the United Nations. We'll have more on Libya later in the broadcast. In news from Bahrain, unknown assailants have attacked the home of Nabil Rajab, the head of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights. Rajab said tear gas grenades were thrown into his home early Monday morning. You can go to our website to see a full interview with Najib Rajab. Human Rights Watch reports that tear gas grenades used in the attack were manufactured by federal laboratories in Salzburg, Pennsylvania. The Independent newspaper of London has revealed Britain discussed plans to exploit Iraq's oil reserves with some of the world's biggest oil companies 5 months before it joined the United States in invading the country. Citing previously secret documents, the newspaper said at least 5 meetings were held between British officials and BP and Royal Dutch Shell in late 2002. BP privately told the British Foreign Office at the time Iraq was, quote, more important than anything we've seen for a long time. The documents were obtained by the oil campaigner Greg Muttitt, author of the new book Fuel on the Fire, Oil and Politics in Occupied Iraq.
Tony Blair famously said in early 2003, the idea that we're interested in Iraq's oil is absurd. It's one of the most absurd conspiracy theories you can imagine, if you remember. And at the same time as he was saying that, there was an internal document, a secret document in the Foreign Office, which set out British strategy towards Iraqi oil, and it said Britain has an absolutely vital interest in Iraq's oil.
The U.S. Supreme Court has rejected an appeal by 5 Chinese Muslims, known as Uyghurs, who've been held without charge at Guantanamo since 2002. The Center for Constitutional Rights, which has represented some of the men, criticized the ruling. In a statement, the organization said, quote, the practical impact of today's decision is that detainees will remain in America's illegal offshore prison indefinitely, notwithstanding their exoneration. Newly disclosed diplomatic cables released by WikiLeaks reveal the Obama administration led a vigorous campaign to stymie an independent UN investigation into possible war crimes committed by Israel during its assault on Gaza in 2008 and 2009. The campaign was led by Susan Rice, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. According to the magazine Foreign Policy, Rice issued a veiled warning in one cable to the president of the International Criminal Court. She warned an investigation into alleged Israeli crimes could damage the ICC's standing with the United States at a time when the new administration was moving closer to the tribunal. In news from Cuba, Fidel Castro has confirmed his exit from the Communist Party leadership, ceding power to his brother Raul. Fidel had served as first secretary in the Central Committee of the party since the party's creation in 1965. Fidel Castro made the announcement as delegates of the 6th Communist Party Congress were preparing to vote on changes that could bring term limits to key posts. Residents of Benton Harbor, Michigan, voiced outrage Monday night after the city's elected mayor and city commissioners were stripped of all power by an unelected emergency financial manager appointed by Michigan Governor Rick Snyder. Last week, the emergency manager issued an order saying the city commissioners have no power beyond calling meetings to order, approving minutes, and adjourning meetings. City Commissioner Dennis Knowles compared Benton Harbor to a dictatorship. He said, quote, "For the people we represent, they are truly being disenfranchised." Meanwhile, the Reverend Jesse Jackson toured Michigan Monday to help build a coalition against Michigan Governor Snyder. Jackson said, quote, "We don't like one-man rule except in Benton Harbor. We're setting up here what we're fighting there. Your vote for elected officials doesn't count, and that's decimating democracy." In economic news, new data from the Commerce Department shows the largest U.S. multinational companies cut their workforces in the United States by 2.9 million over the past 10 years, while increasing employment overseas by 2.4 million. In 2009, the contrast was most stark. The U.S. companies cut 1.2 million jobs at home while adding 100,000 jobs overseas. Newly released tax data shows the tax rate for the wealthiest Americans has been effectively cut in half since the mid-1990s. In 1995, the richest 400 Americans paid on average 30% of their income in federal taxes. In 2007, the richest Americans paid less than 17%. During that same period, the combined annual income of the richest 400 Americans soared from $6 billion to $23 billion. On Monday, tax day protests were held in some 300 cities. Many protesters focused their attention on Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Google for avoiding to pay their full share of taxes by using tax code loopholes.
My name is Bartella Marcus. I'm the community director for the Borough of Brooklyn. I would like to see my tax dollars going to education. They've been cutting too much money away from education. Our kids are not being properly educated, right? Instead of spending the money for the war, take that money and put it into the economy so we can solve the problems here.
In India, police opened fire on hundreds of protesters Monday at a demonstration against the construction of a new 6-reactor nuclear power station. One protester was killed. More than 20 people were arrested. In news from Africa, rioting broke out in the northern Nigeria after election officials announced President Goodluck Jonathan had won re-election. The Red Cross said many people were killed, hundreds injured, thousands displaced in northern Nigeria by supporters of Goodluck Jonathan's northern rival, former Army ruler Muhammadu Buhari. In political news, retired Army Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez is considering running in Texas as a Democrat for the seat of retiring Republican Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. Sanchez was commander of U.S. forces in Iraq during the height of the abuses at the Abu Ghraib prison. The American Civil Liberties Union and other organizations have long criticized Sanchez for his role in the abuse. In 2006, University of Wisconsin professor Alfred McCoy, the author of A Question of Torture, spoke to Democracy Now! About General Sanchez.
In September of 2003, General Sanchez issued orders, detailed orders for expanded interrogation techniques beyond those allowed in the U.S. Army Field Manual 3452. And if you look at those techniques, what he's ordering, in a essence, is a combination of self-inflicted pain, stress positions, and sensory disorientation.
The Pentagon's Inspector General has issued a report clearing retired Army General Stanley McChrystal violating military policy standards. McChrystal was dismissed last year after Rolling Stone published an article in which McChrystal and his aides made disparaging remarks about top Obama administration officials and exposed long-standing disagreements between civilian and military officials over the conduct of the war in Afghanistan. Rolling Stone is defending its reporting. In a statement, the magazine said, quote, "The report by the Pentagon's Inspector General offers no credible source or indeed any named source, contradicting the facts as reported in our story, The Runaway General." The author won a George Polk Award for his piece. In Washington, D.C., 21 protesters were arrested Monday for staging a sit-in at the headquarters of the Department of Interior. The protesters were calling for the abolition of offshore oil drilling, coal mining, and tar sands extraction. Kristen Owen of High Country Rising Tide in Wyoming was among those arrested. She criticized Interior Secretary Ken Salazar for his recent announcement the federal government would open up the Powder River Basin in Wyoming for coal mining.
They expect to receive over 758 million tons of new coal from those land leases that will happen on public lands in the Powder River Basin in Wyoming. And that coal will be shipped to coal terminals in the Pacific Northwest and then shipped to Asia, a place where we'll be fueling developing economies with flooding them with cheap fuels that force them to develop coal-based economies instead of renewable energy-based economies.
Also on Monday, over 5,000 youth climate activists rallied at the White House and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to demand action on climate change and renewable energy. Over the weekend, many of the same activists attended the large Power Shift conference. On Friday, President Obama met with a small group of youth climate activists at the White House. Participants included Shadia Fain Wood, a member of the steering committee of the Environmental Action Coalition. In an interview with The Nation magazine, Wood said, quote, "Obama told us it was our job to push the envelope, and it's his job to govern." Meanwhile, the Obama administration and leading power companies are going before the Supreme Court today in an effort to block a global warming lawsuit aimed at forcing cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. A half-dozen states, New York City, and 3 land trusts sued 4 private utilities and the Tennessee Valley Authority over emissions of carbon dioxide from plants in 20 states. The Obama administration and the companies opposed the lawsuits, claiming that federal courts should not set environmental policy. And this year's Pulitzer Prizes have been announced. Jake Bernstein and Jesse Eisinger of ProPublica won Best National Reporting for its series Wall Street Money Machine. It marks the first time the prize has been awarded to a group of stories that were never published in print, just online. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today,